Thank you for tuning in to Behavior Resource and Advocacy Network's new series entitled Pathways to Bridging the Gap. With this series, our mission is to empower parents and caregivers with insights, strategies, and resources for student success. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Pathways to Bridging the Gap series. My name is Keenisha Protho. I'm the owner of Behavior Resource and Advocacy Network, where we provide educational advocacy services to youth in schools with behavior or mental health related challenges. With this series, our goal is to empower parents with insights, strategies, and resources for student success. We do this by bringing in professionals from various aspects of the school setting to share their knowledge and expertise. And today we have Dr. Courtney Govan, who is a previous special education behavior specialist, as well as an expert in special populations. How are you, Dr. Govan?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm wonderful. Super excited to get this conversation started. So today we are going to be talking about navigating the special education process. So this is a huge topic a lot of times with parents because sometimes you just don't know, what you don't know. And so I would like to get started, Dr. Govan, with briefly telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in this work.
My name is Dr. Courtney Govan. I've been an educator for about 10 years now. I've started in special education. I taught special education resource, and I supported students. And then I also worked in general education. Taught second grade, fourth grade, first grade, middle school. So I've had experience in both worlds. I taught a special education resource as well as general education. I had the opportunity to serve, like you mentioned, as a special education behavior specialist. Behavior and behavior modification is something that I'm passionate about, especially when working with students with disabilities. So I did that for a few years, and then now I currently work as an adjunct professor at the University of Houston, helping to prepare, pre-service teachers for the classroom in education. So
Awesome, awesome. That is amazing work that you do. And that is how Dr. Govan and I met because we were both working as behavior
yes.
specialists, and there's so many things that go into that a lot of times we had to talk with each other and bounce ideas off of each other. And so, yeah, definitely great work you're doing. And so, again, super excited to have you here to share your knowledge that you have with parents and caregivers. So, first question, we're going to jump right into it. Can you provide a brief overview of the special education process? I know there's a lot that goes into it. Brief overview from identification to service delivery.
Certainly. So I'll begin with identification. When it comes to identifying a student, to identifying if a student is eligible to receive special education services, it can happen one of two ways. If it begins at the school level, to begin identifying if the school or the classroom teacher would be the first professional to notice it. Any deficits that the student is having after trying interventions through RTI, response to intervention, or a multi-tiered systems of support. If a student isn't responding to those interventions, and the teacher suspects that, hey, there may be more here, and the student may require a greater level of support, they'll begin documenting the interventions that they use, how the student is responding to that over time. And of course, communicating with the parents to keep the parents informed. If after a determined set of time, and that time will be made between the campus, the teacher, the parent, after a set number of weeks of monitoring the student's progress, they may determine that testing is needed. At that point, they may obtain consent. They will obtain consent from the parent in order to begin the ball rolling on testing. Now, that's if the suspected disability is coming from the school, but if a parent also notices that their child is struggling after trying so many other maybe outside resources, maybe tutoring, even the interventions that the school is using, and the parent just feels that, hey, there may be something else here, where my child may need greater support, then the parent can request formally request testing on their child. So that's how they can begin the process of assessment and then identifying the student if the student is eligible to receive SPED services. Once they identify that the student is eligible, and then it will move to a student's admit, review, and dismissal committee, and a student's ARD committee. And that ARD committee is comprised of individuals who have a lot of knowledge about the student or who would be potential service providers if the student is eligible for special education services. And then they will put together the IEP, the Individualized Education Program for that student, and then they will continue to monitor. Within that IEP would be a schedule of services, and then they would monitor those services and how the student is responding. So that's how we go from identifying if a student is eligible, making that determination, and then implementing those services so that the student gets the support they need.
Perfect. And you know what? You kind of mentioned a little bit already, like going into the next question where you mentioned like if the parent is seeing this and maybe they could, do this. And so, quick segue, what should parents do first if they suspect that their child may have some sort of, disability or might need additional intervention on the school side?
Their first step would be to contact their child's teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hold a conference with that child's teacher and share their concerns with the child's teacher, just so that you can make the teacher aware that the parent has these concerns. The parent can either ask the teacher, for suggestions and maybe move to that MTSS or RTI process and then, begin the ball rolling that way. But if a parent wants to formally request, they can either through email or just in writing. By law, they can make a formal request to the school that the child, to the school and to the district, that the child be evaluated. So that they can make a determination if the child is eligible for special education services. But that very first step, if they suspect that their child may have a disability, is to contact that child's teacher.
Perfect. And I love that you said put it in writing. Okay. I
Yes.
cannot stress enough, like as a
Yeah.
advocate, how important it is to put things in writing. It's great that maybe if you have a great relationship with your child's teacher, that you call them on the phone or that you even, talk to admin, on the phone. However, we also know that sometimes, or all of us are busy, right? Parents are
Right.
busy, teachers are busy, administrators are busy, everybody's busy. And so what happens weeks down the line where you're waiting, you may have had a conversation with a teacher like, hey, something else is going on. I don't know exactly what it is. And weeks go by and nothing has happened. And then you talk to the teacher like, hey, I thought, we had a conversation. The grades are still slipping. Like, I don't know what to do. It was like, then it's like, oh yeah, I forgot we did have that conversation. And if
Right.
it's not in writing, you technically have nothing to like back you up.
Right.
Like, no, I sent it on this day, like at this time, this is what we talked about. And that's something else. Because again, a lot of times parents may not know what that something is.
Right.
All I know is I'm getting, maybe emails or phone calls about them not sitting still or that they're running around and like their grades are slipping and I don't know what to do. So quickly stated, make sure you're putting it in writing, an email or something to the child teacher. So that's perfect. And so this kind of goes along with what you were saying earlier about, again, in the process of identifying a child for special education. So once we've done the assessments and all that, we, gone through it, RTI, and it's determined, yes, they do need additional testing. But once they are found eligible, what is the process then for developing that IEP? So once assessments have already been completed, we've already determined they're eligible. What's that process for the IEP?
For developing the student's IEP, once the evaluation is complete, the student's ARD committee, admit, review, dismissal committee would be formed, and just general committee requirements is at least one of the student's general education teachers. The special education teacher, typically one who would be in charge of that student's providing service to that student, or the case manager or service provider, if it's, say, for instance, speech impairment. An administrator or a district or a representative from the district, typically the principal or assistant principal, would fill that role. If the student is limited English proficient, then someone from the student's LPAC committee would have to be there. If it's a high school student and they participate in CTE courses, that's CTE. If a student is eligible for dyslexia, that dyslexia specialist. So anyone who is familiar with the student or have the potential to be a service provider to work with that student, they would come together. They would, along with the assessment personnel who completed the assessment, the diagnostician or the school psychologist, and they would all discuss the results of the evaluation, what was the disability that was found, and then they would all discuss in starting to build that IEP, everyone would provide their input on how the student is currently performing. And that's the first big section of the IEP, which is called the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And everyone will provide their input on how the student is currently performing. And then based off of the results of that evaluation, and the PLAF, that committee, everyone's voice at the table, including the parent. I forgot that's a very important art committee member. The parent,
Yes.
everyone would provide their input on what the student's goals should be, simply based off of data. So every single decision made in building that IEP is built on data. So built on the results of those evaluations, they would determine goals for that student. And goals could be in a variety of things: math, language arts, social studies, behavior, speech. It just depends on where the deficits are for that particular student. Once the goals are built, then the art committee would have to determine what's the student's least restrictive environment. Every student by law must be served in their least restrictive environment. For some students, it can be in the inclusion setting, which is a general education setting with their typically developed peers. Or some students may require a greater need of support, so where they're pulled out into a special classroom for a certain number of minutes a day to receive explicit instruction. Or some students are served in a self-contained environment, given services in order to meet their needs. So that they have to determine the student's LRE. And then they determine what services the student that the school can provide, what services that the school can provide at that campus. And then they determine the frequency, duration, and location of those services. And that part of the IEP is called the schedule of services, so that everyone can see what services the student receives to help them meet their goals. It's all aligned, it all builds off of each other. What services are needed to help the student meet their needs, how often, how many times a week do we think the student needs the support, and then the location. And who would be responsible: the special education teacher, general education teacher, speech therapist, occupational therapist, who would be responsible for delivering those services. And then also they would discuss things such as accommodations or modifications necessary to help the student access the general education curriculum. And they would also talk about state assessment if the student is in grades 3 through 11. So they're building it out step by step, and it's all based on the student's eligibility and all based on that evaluation. And then they discuss any other needs. There may be like special transportation needs, or if a student needs behavioral support, they may discuss a supplement like the BIP. Or if it's a student with autism, they have an autism supplement. So there are other pieces of the IEP that the art committee would all work together on to build out. And then at the end of that, they would hold a meeting, discuss the IEP that was built, and then any changes or recommendations that are needed during that initial ARD meeting, they can still make them then. But then at the end of that meeting, everyone will come to consensus and say, hey, this is the IEP. We agree on the services that are listed within this IEP. And then everyone's signatures are obtained and their approval, and then they would implement the IEP. If the parent waives the 5 days, there's 5 days before they can implement a new IEP. The parent can choose to waive those 5 days and start implementing that IEP right away. So that's how they go from the evaluation to implementation and building that IEP. It's a collaborative process where every single voice at the table speaks to, what would be best for that student.
Yes, absolutely. And some of the things that you said that really stood out to me, like data and goals, right? So everything in that IEP or individual education program has to be built, one, from the assessment, of course. And then from that assessment, that is how the data is taken to form what those goals need to be in order to support the student and make sure that they are making progress, right? Because how else do we determine if what we're doing is working or not, right? And so usually that is absolutely from those goals. And sometimes I have to, when speaking with like parents and caregivers, sometimes those terms, like you mentioned, diagnostician, school psychologists, sometimes parents are like, what? Who?
What
Okay,
does
and who is this person? And they're
right?
doing it. So I'm like, okay, so they have their own portion, right, of the assessments
Mhm.
that they do. So a diagnostician may be determining like what their IQ level is, right? And the
Mhm.
psychologist may be determining or assessing for like social, emotional aspects, right? The speech therapist may be, searching or assessing for any speech deficits they might have or language deficits. So they all have their own parts to play, right? In the assessment. And so once they do their own assessment, they put their report together, but all those reports make one big assessment, right? To
Right.
determine if a child is eligible. And once we
Mhm.
determine that, that's how we build the IEP. And that goes into everything, of course, that you just said. And of course, there's acronyms and terms
Right.
that we use that sometimes parents are like, huh?
Right, right.
I get it, right? And I totally get it. And so that also goes to our next question. What are some resources that are available for parents to learn about their rights within the special education system? Some of this stuff is like, I'm confused, right? Help me out. What are some resources for parents that can help them, really be able to read up on these things, do their own, do their own
Mhm.
research?
For one big resource that the state of Texas provides, it's actually published through the Texas Education Agency.
Mm-hmm,
It is called the Procedural Safeguards,
mm-hmm,
Parents' Rights and Procedural Safeguards. And this is actually by federal law. The school district has to provide a copy of the procedural safeguards to every parent yearly. Yearly, each and every single year that their child is in special education. So, of course, at that initial meeting, but then every year afterwards as well, they must provide that. And it's a document, and it talks about it, even goes from identification all the way to service delivery. And,
mm-hmm,
like you just mentioned about, we use a lot of acronyms. There's also an appendix within the procedural safeguards that detail what a lot of those acronyms mean and who at the school district to contact. But mostly the manual talks about the parents' rights, the timelines, things that they can request if they don't feel that something is working, or, how often they can, make a request to go back to art and revise something. Sometimes parents don't know
yeah.
that, they have the right to do some of these things. And so it just outlines, if they are unsatisfied, how they can make a special education complaint to the state of Texas if they have to, or if they must move to, uh, can't I think of the title, but if they have a dispute and they have to go to due process and have a due process hearing, their rights in that, if they have to retain some type of representation, all of that information, their rights, and their child's rights when they're receiving special education services. All of that is outlined in the procedural safeguards. It is a digital document. If you go to the Texas Education Agency's website, or even if you just do a quick Google,
Mm-hmm.
procedural safeguards. I believe every state publishes, their own.
Yeah.
But the state of Texas definitely does, and it's a digital document, so it's a PDF, and it's rather long, but it does outline the parents' rights, and that's one major resource that parents can utilize to learn about their rights within special education. Also, too, school districts have their own, I would say, condensed version of the procedural safeguards for parents, and it's typically like a brochure or pamphlet. But then that would require it's not always just sent out or blasted out.
Mm-hmm.
That would require parents to kind of do some advocacy and call up to the school district or email the school, the principal, to see if they can get their district's framework of special education and their rights within that. So instead of the big larger document, you can contact your school district directly, and they can give you a more condensed version of it using simpler language that parents can understand.
Yeah, yeah. But we gotta read it, right? We gotta go
Yes, we
through
have
it.
to read it. Right.
We gotta read it. We gotta go through it to know like what those rights are. Yeah, to be informed, right? And I feel like that can also help parents just make more informed decisions, right? And also when they come to those meetings prepared, right, from reading those procedural safeguards, so they don't feel, you know, intimidated, honestly, by a lot of these ARD meetings, unfortunately. But and I tell my parents all the time, you're the expert though. You're the expert in your child.
Your child.
Everyone is an expert in their own, their own lane, their own rights. But you're the expert here when it comes to that baby. You are.
Yes,
So
right.
come to this meeting like that, right? Show up like that. And so that brings us to our final question. What are some common misconceptions about the special education process that you would like to clarify for parents?
Yes, I have two big
Okay.
misconceptions about special education that I would like to clarify for parents. Number one, we hear this all the time, that, oh, special education is a label. It is not labeling your child. It
Mhm.
is a set, a coordinated services in order to provide support to your child, right? In order for them to function and achieve with their typically developed peers, and access the same general education curriculum, because the TEKS don't change. They're not a different set of TEKS for, any student. Every single child is unique. Everyone must, be taught the same TEKS. It's just that some students require additional services and support in order to help them learn and master those TEKS. And so it's not a label. No one is labeling your child, but it is just a coordinated set of services in order to provide support. And then secondly is that, we have a misconception of, once my child is in SPED, they'll be in SPED forever. Once my child is in special education, they'll be in special education forever. That's not necessarily the case. Let's say, for instance, a child is admitted to special education in the second grade. We notice a learning disability in the second grade. Years go by, things change. None of us are static. That child is now in eighth grade and may no longer require that much support or pull out. And so maybe the student will, still receive SPED services, but it may be once a week for 30 minutes. But in second grade, it was like three times a week for 90 minutes or whatever. So their level of support may decrease over time to the point where they no longer require it. I mean, there were many students, that we worked with, who, initially did have some behavior challenges, and we had to put that bit together. But over time, maybe 3-4 years have passed, and those interventions have worked. That student no longer needs to be supported by a bib. That's the same case too. Some students get in at second grade, or at any grade level, receive the support and the services they need, and then they're dismissed. The art committee feels that the student no longer needs specialized support in order to, continue to achieve. And some students, do just fine. So, once they're in it, it does require, because I say, the problem didn't occur overnight. So therefore a solution won't occur overnight. So some students will require a much greater support over time, but not every student will be in it their entire, pre-K to 12th grade. So
yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, because I've heard that as well. And sometimes parents don't even want, their kids to be assessed because of that. No, we're not doing that. And I think that sometimes when you word it, well, maybe let's look at it like this. Let's look at it like support, right?
Yeah.
Let's not look at it as like
A
this
bad
label.
thing. Right.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to be a bad thing. If we notice that they need support in an area, let's do it, right? Let's provide them with that support. Absolutely. So I'm really, really, truly hoping that these types of like conversations, right, will allow parents to change their perspective too in different cases, right? Especially when it relates to special education, because maybe when they were growing up, right, they may have heard, bad or had bad feelings or bad reputation or what have you about special education. But we're here to dispel, right, some of those myths. So it doesn't necessarily mean they have to be in special education for the long haul, right? Till senior year. If that's what they need, that's what they need. But that's not always the case. So I agree 100%. And thank you so much, Dr. Govan. This conversation has been to the point, but excellent.
Yes.
I
It
must
was
say,
great.
it was. So thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have you back for some
Okay.
other conversations. So
Yes, I'd love to come back and help however I can.
I appreciate you. Thanks so much. Bye, y'all. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pathways to Bridging the Gap series. Behavior Resource and Advocacy Network's goal is to always empower parents, caregivers, and communities with the tools and knowledge needed to advocate for youth in the school setting. Please tune in for further episodes. Please like, share, and subscribe.